Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. Welcome to our witnesses. Today, what we are looking at is this. We have an enormous amount of doubts surrounding the issuance of this $237 million contract. It's clear for many people. It's clear for us. Mr. Baylis is a former member of Parliament, Liberal member of Parliament. He found a way that we think of operating by going around and engaging a company that was created by Mr. Jamieson. We're all Canadians. We all want to save our country, but $237 million belongs to the Canadian taxpayers. Mr. Baylis, when did you speak to Mr. Jamieson the very first time?
Le processus, c'est que Mr. Jamieson.
The process was that Mr. Jamieson put this consortium in place, and there was someone who knew someone in our company. That person contacted the person in our country, but perhaps you could speak to Mr. Godera. Another person called Mr. Godera. That's how it started. And then Mr. Godera talked to Mr. Jamieson. And then after that, they said, well, Mr. Godera asked me if we wanted to be involved in the consortium. And he gave my phone number to Mr. Jamieson, and Mr. Jamieson called me. Mr. Paulus, on this point, you said that and I want to be very clear on this because you said that I was trying to build a shell company. No, I didn't know Mr. Jamieson. I'd never met him before in my life, and I knew no one in his consortium. They called. We are known in the area, in the field. A lot of people who work in a similar field know about us. And all they did was ask, can you help us? I want to say perhaps the 29th or the 30th of March, but I'm not really sure about the date. Yes, but Mr. Baylis, the date is actually comes right at the end of the time set aside for the call for tenders, the 31st rather of March, and PSPC was involved in that in terms of the tender. So there's a lot of millions of dollars and even billions of dollars that have been involved in transactions. Many Canadians have great difficulty understanding what's happening. We know that these ventilators, these V4C560s, they were on the market for $13,000, and you were selling them for $23,000. That comes to $100 million more expensive. How do you explain that to Canadians? Absolutely. We can answer your question with respect to the pricing. The way it worked was this, but I'm going to give Mr. Godera the floor because he's vice president of that particular department. So, Mr. Godera, if you would please continue.
Yeah, I'd be happy to explain exactly how we approach this. So our device is a replica of the Medtronic PB560 ventilator. And the way we approach is we price our ventilator to the same as what the Medtronic PB560, which is $10,000 US at the time. And that's what we started with. But the reality is what we're providing is more than the base ventilator because we had to accessorize and configure the ventilator for appropriate use in the COVID. And there's actually 3 separate areas which we had to account for. The first is that the ventilator that we provide had to be provided with many more accessories so that when it was delivered ultimately to a hospital and starting to be used on multiple patients, which is different than how the PB560 would be used, it'd be ready to go. So we provided 10 times the number of accessories that are called exhalation blocks. We provided 10 times the number of inlet filters. We provided 6 times the number of oxygen inlet connectors. We specially configured the ventilator for appropriate settings for COVID. And additionally, we also set it up with appropriate settings that are appropriate for COVID patients. So that was bucket one, which was to really flesh out that system so it's appropriate for those patients.
Merci.
Then,
Merci.
well,
Thank you. Thank you.
related to the costs. So the second one, if I may, just to explain, because I know this is one question that's come up often. So the second area was that we had to establish a completely new manufacturing facility dedicated and specific for ventilator production. We had to hire 250 people, special tooling, equipment, components, and we also had to then secure a global supply chain. So we had those two. And then the third one is that we had to account for the fact that during COVID, things were much different than obviously when the PB560 would be made beyond that. So there was major changes in shipping costs. We knew that.
Merci, Monsieur Godera.
Thank you, Mr. Godera. I do apologize, but I do have to move on with the questioning. Mr. Jamieson, you are in a business that makes brake pads. How did you come to the idea of making ventilators?
Well, that's thank you for your question. It's exactly what I said in my opening introduction. We thought we could make ventilators. So our theory for Ventilators Canadians was to go license a ventilator. And I make auto parts every day, and we make a safety device. So first of all, in auto parts, making brakes, you have to stop a car at a very high speed. So the complexity of making a ventilator and meeting regulatory in the United States is actually quite similar. It's just a different way. You
Mr.
have recall
Jamieson,
legislation.
I'm sorry to interrupt you at committees. Time is always our enemy. And I gave you a few seconds more just so you could get some kind of answer in. And please do feel free to expand on your answer during another question from another member, if you like. But I'm trying to arbitrate and be fair.
No problem,
with time.
Mr. Sweet. Yeah.
Now on to Mr. Fergus for 6 minutes.
The trick is, Mr. Chair, is always to find that unmute button. So thank you very much. And thank you to the witnesses for coming here today. And my questions are going to be for Mr. Baylis in particular. But before I do, I'd just like to recognize that Mr. Baylis, on behalf of myself and certain my colleagues all around the table, we'd like to extend to you our condolences on the recent passing of your father a couple of weeks ago. So I'd just like to share that with you. Mr. Baylis, did you in any way try to influence the government to issue the contract for ventilators to Mr. Jamieson's group?
Thank you, Mr. Fergus, for your kind words about my dad. No, I know that it's been suggested, and that I can state unequivocally here that I did not speak to people said I spoke to the Prime Minister. No, I did not speak to the Prime Minister. I did not speak to cabinet ministers to ask them or influence them for a contract. I did not speak to members of Parliament of any party. In fact, I didn't speak to anybody to try and influence them to give a contract to Baylis Medical or to Mr. Jamieson or to Ventilators for Canadians. I was not. I was involved in one phone call that Mr. Jamieson had set up, which had to do with the advancements that we needed to go secure the parts. That was my involvement with Mr. Jamieson as he was negotiating and putting together this consortium. So I was not reaching out or doing any kind of backroom, as has been suggested, request to anyone to get me a contract or to get Mr. Jamieson a contract or to get Ventilators for Canadians or to get FTI. I did not speak to, in that light, I can say I didn't speak to anybody, whether in government or not.
When did you, and I appreciate that, and let me just build on that, because in your answer, when did you first find out that Mr. Jamieson's group had been awarded the contract for ventilators?
He called us on I think he got it on the 11th, I believe, January, March, April 11th, I believe. This was happening very fast, Mr. Fergus. It was a whirlwind of activities. He had kind of said that he was working on this and pushing forward. Those first few weeks, as you saw the tragedies unfolding around the world, and when we think about New York State, New York City, it's very close to our major cities.
Very much so.
And COVID did not know political barriers or that. So it was a rush and a very pressurized situation. I can tell you that.
Mr. Baylis, in spite of the recent passing of your father, I'm certain you were monitoring what was being said about you in the media or at this committee. I'm certain you noticed that the ethics commissioner had found no reason to investigate you. Can you explain why, apart from a political witch hunt, why you are here today?
Yeah, obviously, Mr. Fergus, it saddens me in a certain way that that this has happened. I understand that I'm a past member of parliament and things will be politicized, and that there's people that will see there's a political gain to be had by that. I understand that. I'm not naive. I can tell the Canadian people, and I can state unequivocally, I did not use any relationships to try and get any contract for anything. I've not done that. And not only that, I'm very proud of what we've accomplished. I'm very proud. There's been a number of statements, as you said, Mr. Fergus. First of all, there's been 14 contracts, not one or two, 14 separate contracts for ventilators and accessories. And Mr. Jamieson's contract and FTI, Ventilators for Canadians, is just one of 14. So this idea that it was single sourced, these are falsehoods that have been spread, if I could say that.
Mr. Baylis, one final question. As a former MP, you are aware that anything you say in this committee is protected by privilege. Is there anything that you would like to say to some of the members who have made what I characterize as outrageous statements about you, your company, and your partnership with Mr. Jamieson?
No, I understand the political game. I think that what everybody should know and everybody should really feel good about is this is a wonderful coming together. This could not have been done without the work of Mr. Jamieson and this consortium that provided logistics, that provided manpower, that provided procurement expertise. Really, I think people should see the wonderful thing of these people coming together of different stripes, different businesses, and I might even say different political inclinations. And I'll let Mr. Jamieson explain that too. But that how we all came together. So maybe, Rick, I don't know if you want to mention something there too.
No, I think the only thing I would mention is that I did not know Mr. Baylis, number one. And number two, it never dawned on me that politics would ever enter into my relationships with my subcontractors. That's it. We were doing a job that we thought, and I can tell you, we worked 16 hours a day. And we had a huge team of people who were involved in this project. So I did not know who Mr. Baylis was. It was actually, I didn't know who Baylis Medical was. Despite the fact that these guys, this is a big company, I'd never heard of them before. I'm in automotive. They don't run in my circles. I don't know these people.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, do I have any more time?
You've got 3 seconds, Mr. Fergus. Just enough to find find your mute button.
Thank you to all the witnesses.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fergus, Mr. Jamieson, and Mr. Baylis. Now we'll move on to Madame Goudreau. Pour 6 minutes, Madame.
6 minutes, Madame. Hello. Thank you. I'm very happy to meet with you today. I have a very simple question, but a question that requires some explanation on your part. First of all, to Mr. Jamieson, earlier in your statement, you mentioned that you had contacted the public service, but I didn't hear who precisely was the person that you contacted. We understand the wish to save people. We understand these very praiseworthy motives, but who did you contact?
Are you asking me if I'm a lobbyist? Is that the question? Yeah, I'm not a lobbyist. I'm an auto parts manufacturer. This is the first time I've ever been involved in a government contract. And simply, we were working, our theory was we had 3.
Je n'ai pas la traduction.
I'm afraid I don't hear the interpretation. I understand a little bit of English, but I realize that I didn't have the interpretation.
Yes, you didn't change the button on your screen, did you, Mr. Jamieson? Mr. Jamieson, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
I can hear you fine, Mr. Sweet.
Mais la question...
But the question was a very simple one that I was asking. Who did you communicate with when you said, I contacted the public service? That is what I understood from the interpretation.
Like I said, I'm not a lobbyist. I wouldn't even know the first thing about it being a lobbyist. That's something that happens in Ottawa. It doesn't happen in Guelph. Okay? Lobbying the mayor is asking to get your road fixed.
Je comprends.
I certainly understand.
We're in full compliance with the procurement process. I reached out to the government, and I'm getting some echo here, in order to explain what the Ventilators Canadians was doing. And what we were trying to do was build a licensed ventilator. And that's why I told you in the opening statement that what we did was...
Oui, mais qui...
Yes, but who was the individual that you did contact?
I'm not sure I'm supposed to mention actual civil servants' names. I don't think that's fair.
Well, I'll ask you the question again later, but let me explain. I certainly understand that in business, and also we had this wish to save everybody insofar as possible, but where Mr. Baylis understood the lobbying rules. And they mention that for 5 years you cannot. And if you want to be as neutral and transparent as possible, you have to be whiter than the snow, than the falling snow. So in the last months, I wanted to know who you spoke to in the public service.
I'm happy to answer that in a different way. I can tell you I contacted the public service before I met Mr. Baylis, or before I even met Baylis Medical. That's the best answer. So we were reaching out to the government because we thought we were going to crowdsource these ventilators and give them to Canadians. And what happened was that I got some advice from a retired partner of one of the big accounting firms and said, this is government's responsibility. You're only going to if you crowdsource and it doesn't work out for you, people who've given you money won't be very happy. So we changed directions, and that's how that happened.
But you know that you can mention the name of the public servant that you spoke to. In all the committees, we've heard a lot of names because we want to be sure that the taxpayers' money, and you are one of them, is being properly used. Who did you speak to?
We spoke to a gentleman named Charles Vincent. And I have essentially, I can even tell you how I found Mr. Vincent. I knew one single politician who I thought might be able to get me to Ottawa. And I called the mayor of Stratford, who I personally know, Dan Matheson, and asked him if he knew anybody. And he said, I'm going to call up to Ottawa and see if we can get someone to talk to you. And I said I would be at my desk to 11 o'clock at night for the next 3 nights. And Mr. Charles Vincent called me back at 11:30 at night, and we talked till 1:30 in the morning, and I explained to him what I was trying to do. And the problem was, for me, I felt that if we could raise a lot of money from the public, and I called specifically to ask the government the ethics question, we're at an ethics committee, of how it would look if private donors in Toronto who are willing to give me millions of dollars wanted those ventilators to go to Toronto hospitals. And the problem was we were Ventilators for Canadians, and we wanted to ask a senior civil servant how we might do that. And when he found out what we were doing...
C'est tout à fait légitime.
Yes, so it's quite legitimate. My last question for you, I know time's flying, but when you did deal with Mr. Baylis, who knew how things work here because he had been in place here for some years. I'm a new member, and I know that before acting, you have to be sure. So I'm asking Mr. Baylis the question now. What about the lobbying laws? Did you indicate to Mr. Jamieson that things were being done to be politically correct? I wasn't involved in all the work that Mr. Jamieson was doing. The question really was a manufacturer with standards to produce 1345s of the foresee. We all knew that there were things that had been set up in Public Health Canada that required compliance. And I can also say, Madame Goudreau, that I was a member, but in the past. But the fact that I was a member in the past, he just became aware of that when it came out in the news. Well, I realize that one day I won't be a member anymore, but I know I'm a businesswoman, that I will not be able to do certain things for 5 years after that. I'm a businesswoman, so I will be very vigilant. And in an instance like this, where there are millions of dollars involved, my fellow citizens' money, I have difficulty believing.
Madame Goudreau.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Thank you, Madame Goudreau.
On to Mr. Angus for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for coming this afternoon. And Frank, I'm very sorry to hear about your father. And, you know, we really miss you on this committee. I had to find a reason to bring you back. So welcome back to the committee that you served so well. And I am very interested on the issue of the ventilators. And I remember the crisis in March and the panic and the need to get funding out the door on these issues, particularly on ventilators. But we aren't the health committee. We're here at ethics. And the issue with ethics is coming down to making sure that we followed the rules. In 2008, Rahim Jaffer, who was a former member of parliament, public office holder, returned to try and get a deal with the government he served, and he was convicted for breaking the Lobbying Act. Mr. Bruce Carson was a former public office holder, and he was charged and convicted for coming back to the government he served. And they were offering good ideas. Mr. Jaffer's was green energy. Mr. Carson's was clean water for First Nations. So when your name came up, obviously, it raises questions. And so my question to you, Mr. Baylis, is did you contact the ethics commissioner when you got involved in this? And what did he say?
Thank you for your kind words, Charlie, about my father. And if you're missing me another time in ethics, just give me a call, please.
Okay.
I'm happy to speak to you other than being summoned here. But no, I did not contact Mr. Dion. I think that he's a very competent man and he knows the rules. And I do believe I have been watching this. Obviously, my name's come up and I've been watching it. And I am aware, as Mr. Fergus pointed out, that, and as the rules state very clearly, that his job is to monitor the works of sitting members of parliament. His job is not to provide advice, nor is there any opportunity to provide advice for non-sitting members of parliament. Having said that, let me answer your question a different way. The world was going through a horrendous situation. We saw doctors crying that people were dying because they didn't have enough ventilators.
Sorry, Frank. I don't have a lot of time here.
It's an ethical question.
I get that. I guess I'm just
but my point is
about
this,
whether you talked to the ethics commissioner or not.
Yeah, my point is this about the ethics, Charlie, if I could, please. If I could. When Mr. Jamieson called us up and they said, will you help? Will you help us? My answer then, ethically, was yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I didn't need to ask the ethics commissioner to vet that question.
No, I totally understand, Mr. Baylis. Your other former colleague, Jane Philpott, who I have enormous respect for, when she finished parliamentary life, went to work up in my region. And I think some of your Liberal colleagues made a complaint to Mr. Dion, and she wasn't allowed to work with some of the most impoverished First Nation communities because your Liberal colleague said under the rules she couldn't do that as a former office holder. So we just need to, I just trying to get a sense of how this came down. And the one thing I noticed is, I was surprised Minister Anand said she'd never heard of you. She said she couldn't pick you out of the crowd. I personally thought she's selling you really short. You were very popular in Parliament. You were very well known. And the reason I asked that is because when the documents came out about this contract, it wasn't like you were treated as a subcontractor. Baylis Medical was named in all the press releases. It was right up front. Do you see why these questions need to be asked so that we can reassure the public that the contracts that are awarded are being done meeting all the ethical standards so that there aren't favors being given to people who are former office holders?
I believe it is the job of the opposition to be vigilant and to monitor these works and that. And this COVID crisis has seen an explosion of expenses, and I don't think there's anything wrong with the ethics committee or any other committee investigating things that might have come up. I'll be honest, it had hit me personally to see my name and being these falsehoods being stated about, and lines being drawn that were not true, and some people mocking me in the House of Commons. Mm-hmm. Of course, I'm a human being. I didn't appreciate that, but I try to stay above that and away from it. And I have great respect for the whole process and the people involved. So I don't see there's anything wrong with asking questions. I do think there's something wrong with casting dispersions and that. And, I think that you have here the people that did it. And I really would be wrong even to take any credit. It's really Mr. Jamieson that did all this work, and then Mr. Godera that worked together under his guidance, under the guidance of Mr. Jamieson.
I have a very short little question, just in terms of, because you said you weren't involved in any of the negotiations with government, which I think would have been.
I was on one. I'll clarify.
Yeah,
I was on one call.
Could you just clarify that for me? And that's all I need to know.
So
thank you.
Sure. So what happened when the crisis hit? We have my partner and I. We took a decision. We said we don't want to lay anybody off. But we have 750 people. So we have an enormous payroll. So we started taking a lot of actions. There's two people that got laid off. My partner and I actually took our salaries to zero. We cut expenses such as travel. That turned out to be a moot point because travel was cut for all kinds of reasons anyways. But we said no more travel. We said no more. We used to pay for people to take courses or that. We cut courses. We cut matching your RSPs. So we would say we could keep everybody. Then we remortgaged all our buildings. We extended our line of credit. We put a pile of money to say we're going to get through this thing together as a team. Then Mr. Jamieson says, you got to start buying parts and you got to do this. I said, listen, we have some money, but we cannot risk our company. That money is there to get us through this COVID crisis. We need an advance. If you want us to go out and start doing all this work, buying the parts, and the parts were going like hotcakes and the prices were exploding, and that it was a crazy time. And we said, we cannot use this money, so we need an advancement.
Mr. Baylis, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I tried to give you, I thought that was an important question, and I tried to give you some extra time, but we're almost a full minute over.
Sorry.
So if you can maybe complete that answer.
Well, it's just that Mr. Jamieson asked me to get on the phone. He set some call, and I don't know who was on the call. He said, explain to them why you need this advancement. That's it. And Mr. Godera calculated how much we needed.
Okay, thank you very much. Also, before we go to the next round, and it'll be Mr. Barrett who'll begin the next round, I wanted to just clear something up, both for the witnesses' reputations and the committees. Mr. Baylis, I'm certain you used the word innocently, but you were invited to the committee. You weren't summoned or subpoenaed because we have that capability, and I want to make sure that everybody knows that you came willingly, and we invited you, and you accepted that invitation. So I thought that would be clear for everybody. Now on to Mr. Barrett for 5 minutes.
Well, thanks very much, Chair, Mr. Baylis, Mr. Jamieson. Thanks for joining us today. My first question is for Mr. Jamieson. Why did you create FTI on the day that the tender was due?
FTI was created. Actually, it was in the process of being created long before this contract was set. The FTI name was actually going to be used for a brake pad business I was starting. And when we refer to the top quality brake pads as professional grade, FTI stood for First Line Technologies Incorporated Professional Grade. The company was available and I used it. When you start a company, with a new business, it's always the advice of your lawyers and accountants to use a separate single purpose entity. That was the reason the company was incorporated, because I wanted a March 31st year for the company.
Okay. And so the reason was the advice you received was to use a new company to engage this contract.
Correct.
Okay. So you provided us the name with one official with whom you communicated. Would you undertake to provide to the committee in writing following your appearance the names of other officials from the Government of Canada with whom you've communicated for the purpose of this contract?
Sure. I have no,
okay.
Everybody I talked to my contract authority with PSPC. I've had two, Jeff Moore and Sandra Leslie, both competent civil servants.
Well, I appreciate that, sir. You expressed some hesitation to go through the names, and that's fine. And in order to give you the opportunity to provide a complete answer, if you're comfortable providing them, just sending a list to the clerk or the chair.
I didn't know I could actually, so I'm happy to answer your question now if you like.
Okay.
So, as I said, my contract managers were Jeff Moore at PSPC, Michelle Muscoli, Joelle Paquette, and at FAC, I've had really good relationships with the technical authority, Peter Morellis, and the coordinator of the National Stockpile, whose name is Pascal St. Louis, all very competent people.
Terrific. Thank you. I have one last question for you before I have a couple of quick questions for Mr. Baylis. So FTI is the only company with no medical experience that obtained a contract. What made FTI different?
Actually, in terms of medical, I believe the other contracts didn't have medical experience either. There were no contracts, no one making ICU grade ventilators in Canada. What we did was a moonshot. We physically did this, as did the other companies, and we've delivered 7,788, and you can check to see that we've delivered by far the most ventilators of anyone.
Thank you very much.
Bar none.
Thank you for the answer, sir. Mr. Baylis, with respect to the names that Mr. Jamieson just offered, are you just on hearing them just now? Do you know any of those individuals?
Do you mean have I heard their names before, or do I know them, like, other than hearing their names?
Yeah, other than hearing their names. Did you have
No, I mean, Mr. Jamieson would tell me that I've heard these names before, but I don't know who they are or what. I mean, Mr. Jamieson would tell me what if something was fed back. More actually, Mr. Godera would be the one that he'd be feeding it back to. So I'd be getting it. They were the ones working together very adroitly, very tightly, if I could say that.
Okay, I have two more questions in just a minute to get through them, if I could. One is, has Baylis Medical had other contracts with the Government of Canada? And my other question is, just to clarify, you had said that you didn't advocate on behalf, I'm paraphrasing, advocate on your behalf or of VFC with ministers or members. Have you communicated with ministers or members during the pandemic? And if so, what was the general nature of those conversations?
So I prepared a list regarding the government contracts that so I assume that in 2011. In 2011,
sorry, Mr. Baylis,
we had one with 2011.
If you could submit it in writing instead of reading it out, if you could submit it to the clerk, that would be fantastic, and then you could answer the last question. I think we just have a couple seconds left.
Sure. I just want to point out one thing too on these contracts. That there's two.
Sure.
There's two of them that we had prior. We had one after I left. We had two prior. They were both with the government of Prime Minister Harper, the Conservative government. And one was for developing a device, and the other one was a loan. We were opening a new factory, and we got a loan where you didn't have to pay what was really helpful. We were opening a new factory. Most loans, the banks have to start repaying the money right away.
Sure.
This one, we got the money, and we were able to then you didn't have to start paying back to a certain window of time, and that window of time.
As you're one of the people that knows that time is always our enemy. We've run out of time there. And
so, Chair, Chair, I just wondered, with respect to those last two questions, and I appreciate you respecting the committee's time. Through you, if you found it acceptable, I'd just like to request that perhaps Mr. Baylis be able to provide a response in writing to the committee, and then we can move on.
Yeah, it was my understanding the way Mr. Baylis had nodded that he was going to do that, and
Yeah, I will.
Yeah.
With respect to both my questions, conversations and contracts?
I can answer your other question right now too, if you want.
Actually, it would be better in writing, because now I need to go on to the next question, Mr. Baylis, if you would please. Now we'll go on to Mr. Sorbera for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome everyone. Mr. Baylis, Frank, nice to see you today. I know in our conversations, your father was a deep man of faith, and I know he was proud before, and I know he's very proud of you still, and is looking down on you and your family today. And God bless, and then obviously my condolences. I've listened to this testimony very, very closely, and I followed along the last few months in the House of Commons, the sort of smear and fishing expedition that some of my honorable colleagues who have been elected by their voters have made to you, Mr. Baylis. And I want to say, I actually want to sort of say sorry. I apologize. I apologize for them doing that. I'm not going to take responsibility, but I do apologize, because companies in Canada, from coast to coast to coast, whether it's here in Woodbridge Group, Mr. Jamieson, you're part of the auto part supplier base in Canada, the APMA, what they've done, stepping up, building masks, PPE, you name it. A lot of companies stood up here in Canada and said, we will be there. And that's what I want to say thank you to both of you gentlemen for doing and delivering almost 8,000 ventilators. So Canadians that have been impacted by COVID-19, so we could save lives and put in place the health capacity that we needed. And I want to say thank you. You are both entrepreneurs, directly and indirectly employ thousands of Canadians in several provinces in very well-paying, good benefit, great middle-class jobs. And I want to say thank you. And I want to encourage you to continue doing that, because entrepreneurs are at the heart of our economy and businesses are at the heart of the economy. Mr. Baylis, we know you were a former member of Parliament and one with a lot of integrity, a lot of intelligence, and we do miss you. Mr. Jamieson, just for full disclosure, you have in the past have donated, to my understanding, and I believe it's in a public record, to candidates in the past, and I just want to get on the record, you have donated to prior Conservative candidates in the past, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, and like I said, it never dawned on me that politics would enter into any of my relationships with any subcontractors. It's the farthest thing from my mind.
Yes, and thank you for stating that, because at this moment in time where we're at as a country and battling COVID-19, it is so important for us to stay focused. And on the comment for Mr. Baylis, my understanding from what the Ethics Commissioner has disclosed, that there are no ongoing, or have there ever been any ongoing investigations or any correspondence with yourself, Mr. Baylis?
I know, Mr. Sorbera, and thank you for, again, about your kind words here. No, I learned when I was, I watched a little bit of the committee, and he brought my name up. That was the first that I ever knew or not about his even looking into it. But I assume then he was hearing things, so he looked into it and made his determination.
And quickly to both of you gentlemen, because I Mr. Jamieson, in my riding, I have about 1.5 kilometers away from here is the headquarters of Martin Ria. Yep. About 2 kilometers down, they employ 700 workers in my riding at an auto parts factory. So I know your business very, very well. And I just curious, before COVID even broke out, was there any sort of relationship between Baylis Medical and your Jamieson, your companies?
No, not even close.
So you guys have come together. Mr. Baylis is a medical device company that's been around for decades.
That's right.
Not just for 5 years, for decades. And yourselves, you guys came together and brought expertise together to make ventilators. And today we have almost 8,000 ventilators to ensure and help Canadians from coast to coast to coast.
I'll just make one comment on that, Mr. Sorbera.
Please.
What actually happened, and I can tell you this, it was a phenomenal time we were living in. I could call just about anybody. And normally when you talk to business people, they want an NDA. Nothing happens fast. And Canadians really were amazing. You call someone for help, they tell you what they could or couldn't do it. And often they tell you things that were normally trade secrets pretty darn quickly to try to move the project along. And I would just add, it's a funny thing for me because it's an unusual thing to hear your name being used in the House of Commons. It was like, well, that's amazing, So, anyways, it's just a different thing for a small business guy from Guelph, Ontario, an entrepreneur.
Well, Guelph is a hub for innovation, and we know how important the environment is there, and we have a lot of great employers down there and a great MP that represents the riding. And look, here I had the Premier of Ontario in my riding at the Woodbridge Foam Corporation, congratulating him. Actually, he came up and picked up boxes and put it in his pickup truck to deliver. The Premier of Ontario at an auto part factory here in my riding, an auto part company just like yourselves. You've done the same thing that the Woodbridge Foam Group did. You stood up for Canadians. Now, my other colleagues on the other aisle may say there's something wrong with that. I don't. And I applaud you and I applaud Mr. Baylis for coming together and delivering almost 8,000 ventilators of this contract that was provided. I say thank you for myself and all Canadians.
Extra time, Mr. Cervera,
thank you, sir.
You're well over. Now we have Madame Goudreau for 2.5 minutes, Madame.
Yes, thank you. And my condolences, Mr. Baylis. It's very hard to lose your father. Mr. Baylis, I'd just like to come back to what we were talking about earlier. In life, there's nothing better than to take action to benefit other people. There are two ways, though, of acting. You can respond to an emergency, like putting out a fire, or planning quickly and managing a situation. But here I face some difficulty, and you'll have to help me out in terms of information. Perhaps the question also could be asked to Mr. Godera. When you started to work with Mr. Baylis, did you ask any questions? Because once you're no longer a member of Parliament, that responsibility follows you even after you've left. So did you ask or discuss anything about that? Because you don't want to discredit what you are doing. You want to be as neutral and exemplary as possible. I think that if you are in a hurry, sometimes that's where the cracks start to show. And you perhaps have to take the time to reflect. Mr. Godera, what did you know about Mr. Baylis? Did you ask him any questions about the requirements, business requirements in using public money in your contract?
I can answer that. So the reality is that Rick Jamieson and FTI had approached us to help support the ventilator program, and FTI was the one negotiating with the federal government. So they were, taking that on, and then we were a subcontractor to FTI. So in that relationship, my responsibility was to say, okay, what is it going to take to get these ventilators going? When is manufacturing going to start? When do we have to hire people? And put all the calculations, put all the planning together to make them. So we weren't dealing with the government. We were dealing with FTI. We were dealing with our internal teams. That's really what we were focused on at that time. And it wasn't really in the conversation that, at that time, what was Mr. Jamieson consulting with the government, that just wasn't part of our conversation.
That's all the time that we have. Now we'll move on to Mr. Angus.
Mais je comprends tout ça, mais en même temps,
I understand all that, but
your time's up. Sorry, I know 2.5 minutes goes very fast. Mr. Angus for 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you. I thank you, gentlemen, for coming.
Chair,
I thank you.
Excuse me. I'm really sorry to a point of order. Just because we've had a couple of requests for written remarks. So, Chair, if it's all right that we inform the witnesses to please put in writing and submit any further information that they think is pertinent to their answers, because I know time is short. And I apologize to Mr. Angus.
Yeah, that's absolutely yes. Certainly any question that you were given that you couldn't finish and you want to make sure that's on record with the committee, please don't hesitate to send that in to the clerk and we'll add that to your remarks. Now on to Mr. Angus.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming and updating us on the work on the ventilators. And we're very pleased that you've actually managed to get to keep on track to get these ventilators out because we're coming into the second wave, and it's going to be frightening time, I think. Frank, I just gotta close on this because I think you'll appreciate it, because my Liberal colleagues, I really appreciate they've been defending auto plants and small workers and trashing everybody on my side of the hall and saying, why did we drag you through the mud here? Well, Frank, it's the way the negotiations went, right? I had a big, long list of people I wanted to bring, and they came to me and said, don't bring Rob Silver, Katie Telford's husband. We don't want him at committee. Oh, why is that? And then they said, we don't want to deal with the judges issue, the issue of bringing forward the partisan Liberal lists about judges' nominations. They said, bring Frank Baylis. So I said, oh, that's great. We'll bring Frank Baylis. So I think they enjoy you as much as I do. So when they ask why you're here, I got to say I was just trying to help out my Liberal colleagues. They really wanted you out of those other guys. So I'm going to go back and look at them and see. Maybe I should have invited them instead. But anyways, I hope you guys are doing well and staying safe. And thank you very much.
Point of order, Chair. I waited till Mr. Angus finished, but I thought it's in the routine proceeding that we discussed and agreed that when it comes to discussion of selection of witnesses, we do that in camera. And I know Mr. Angus just brought up a few names, but that was part of the discussion of I think I don't know. I just sounded to me it was part of the discussion of witness selection. So I just want to bring this up to you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dong. I believe he was talking about private conversations. That's what I heard. Not conversations that happened in this committee.
Yeah, I don't believe it was in camera, so I don't think Mr. Dong does get a point of order. I know he's got, every time I speak, Frank, you'd love it. Every time I speak, Mr. Dong has a point of order. But if you were here, you wouldn't put up with that. But anyways, thank you so much for coming.
That's not true, Charlie.
All right.
I think the reverse is true.
All right, colleagues. Let me thank the witnesses, Mr. Baylis, Mr. Godera, Mr. Jamieson, for taking the time out of your day. Mr. Jamieson, you mentioned that you've been working 16 hours a day. We greatly appreciate that, and that means we've taken a substantial portion of your value from today. So I want to thank you for your investment here. Frank, on behalf of the entire committee, we want to share our sympathies and condolence to you for the loss of your father. I apologize. I did not begin with that, but I certainly want to end with that. And gentlemen, keep up the good work. And we're going to suspend now so that we can get our new witnesses in and start our second half.